After my father passed away, I inherited his antique mansion and secret $1 million art collection, but my uncle claimed it was all his. When I refused, he laughed and said, "You think you deserve any of this? You're nothing." 2 days later, when my dad, Algernon Darnell, died, it was the kind of grief that hit with a strange numbness. He hadn't been sick long, but he'd been quietly withdrawing for years. The old mansion on the edge of Rhinebeck, New York, had become his fortress of solitude, a towering Victorian draped in ivy, sitting on a few acres of forest, and stuffed with antiques like a forgotten museum. We'd never been close, not really. After my parents divorced when I was 10, I stayed with my mother in Albany. Dad stayed in that house, buried himself in his projects, which, I only later realized, meant restoring and collecting rare art. Our relationship was quiet and distant, the kind where birthdays were remembered with cards but rarely phone calls. Still, in the past few years, we'd begun speaking more. I visited occasionally, helped with groceries, and listened while he talked about obscure Austrian painters or old books he'd acquired. But even then, I didn't know the extent of what he had. Or what was coming. I was alone when the lawyer called. "He left everything to you," Mr. Halvorson said, his voice careful. "The house. The land. The contents. All of it." I remember just saying, "Are you sure?" like I thought there had been a mistake. He wasn't. I was still trying to process it all when Uncle Randall showed up. He arrived at the will reading like he was late to a play, wearing sunglasses indoors, coat flapping behind him. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He stood in the corner with a crooked smile and a little shake of his head as the lawyer read everything out. I hadn't seen him in more than a decade. He and my father had long been estranged, something about money, some old fight, I was never told the full story. Growing up, he was always Uncle Randall who travels, who showed up at holidays smelling like cigars and foreign liquor and left early with a pocket full of something shiny. After the reading, he waited until we were alone outside before approaching me. "You think you deserve any of this?" he said, sneering. "You're nothing." I was stunned. I wasn't even angry yet. Just bewildered. He laughed as he walked off. "That house, the art, the land, it's all mine. You'll see." And 2 days later, he filed a claim to contest the will. I moved into the mansion a week later. I didn't know what else to do. I was already staying there during probate, and the house had always scared me a little: creaky floors, long hallways, oil portraits that stared back. But now I had to defend it. I needed to see what, exactly, I was being dragged into. The house was full of relics, gilded mirrors, Roman busts, oil paintings stacked in closets, and books older than the country itself. My dad had clearly spent decades curating a personal museum, but nothing was catalogued. Nothing had insurance. Half the stuff wasn't even stored properly. It took me 3 days to find the key to the West Wing. I'd always assumed it was just more storage, or maybe dangerous with its cracked windows and sagging floors. But it wasn't. It was extraordinary. Behind a velvet curtain, past a hallway lined with rusting candle sconces, was a sealed studio. Inside were canvases covered in white cloths, precise temperature control panels, and shelving lined with handmade wooden crates. When I peeled the cloth off the first painting, I gasped. Not because I recognized it, but because something told me it was real. The texture, the detail, this wasn't a print from a flea market. It was later confirmed to be a Max Beckmann. Another corner held a Sheila drawing. One crate contained sketches I later learned were early works by Gabriele Munter. And beneath one of the paintings, taped to the back of the frame, was a letter addressed to me. My hand shook as I opened it. It was written in my father's old, slanted handwriting. "Celia, if you're reading this, then I've failed in telling you face to face. I spent my life collecting things, but I never knew how to hold on to people. This collection, these works, they're yours. Guard them. Share them only with people who respect their history. I'm sorry I didn't give you more of me while I was alive. But I want you to have this part of me now. I cried for the first time since he passed. Not because of the money, though the art was worth millions, but because I realized how lonely he must have been. And how hard he tried, in his own strange way, to leave something meaningful behind. That night, I locked the West Wing with a new key. 3 days later, someone broke in. Nothing was taken, at least not visibly. But drawers were opened, the curtains pulled down in places. One small painting, a portrait I didn't recognize, was found in the hall, lying flat, as if it had been dropped. I called the police. There were no signs of forced entry. No prints. But I knew it was Randall. A week later, it happened again. And then, just before dawn on a foggy Sunday, I caught him on the security camera. He'd climbed in through the back kitchen window and was rifling through drawers when the alarm blared. I was already on the phone with the police by the time he scrambled out the same window. He was gone before they arrived. He denied everything, of course. And then came the forged will. Yes, he actually produced a handwritten note he claimed was from my father, dated 1994, stating that the property and its contents were meant to go to Randall in full. The paper looked old, the signature even older, but the ink wasn't. My lawyer had it tested. The ink was from a pen that wasn't even manufactured until 2012. And then something unexpected happened. I found my father's journal. It was tucked inside a hollowed-out dictionary in the study, its leather binding cracked, pages yellowing. It wasn't long, just 60 or so pages, but it was enough. Enough to understand. He wrote about Randall. He tricked me once. Stole a painting I loved. Said it was for appraisal and never brought it back. Sold it in Montreal, I heard. I should have cut him off years ago. But I hoped he'd change. If anything happens to me, if Randall ever tries to claim this house, let Celia have the truth. She's the only one who sees value beyond the canvas. It was like having my father speak directly to me from beyond the grave. I turned everything over to Halvorsen, who brought in a private investigator. A week later, they found the Montreal connection, emails between Randall and a black market art dealer, discussing several works with photographs clearly taken from inside the mansion. 2 days after that, Randall was arrested trying to re-enter the property at night with a duffel bag and bolt cutters. He's in jail now, awaiting sentencing. But even with him out of my life, I'm only just beginning to understand the one man I thought I barely knew. I wish I could say that Randall's arrest brought me peace. But it didn't, not immediately. Instead, it kicked off a storm of legal procedures, insurance evaluations, and, most surprisingly, attention. Suddenly, strangers were reaching out. A man from the New York Times called the house, wanting an interview. A local art historian drove up from Bard College and asked to view the paintings. Even a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in decades messaged me on Facebook, saying she'd always had a feeling the house had secrets. I ignored most of them. The house was chaos. Boxes filled with documents, paintings still partially wrapped, dust settling in places where it hadn't been disturbed in years. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the master bedroom, not yet. I stayed in the guest room I used to visit as a child, the one with faded floral wallpaper and a ticking grandfather clock. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house, wondering what else my father had hidden. The investigators continued working. They traced several of the stolen works that had passed through Randall's hands years ago. Some were never recovered. One, a small watercolor, had ended up in a private collection in Sweden. Another was lost in an auction years ago under a false provenance. But what they did recover was enough to prove Randall's pattern of theft, forgery, and fraud. He denied all of it, naturally. Claimed he was set up. That house should have been mine, he said in his statement to police. I helped him build that collection. She came in at the end and took it all. I didn't respond to any of it publicly. Not even when a local reporter showed up at the gate. I wasn't interested in a media circus. All I wanted was to understand what my father left behind, and why. In the middle of all this, I started reading everything in the house. Letters. Receipts. Sketchbooks. He kept everything. There were binders of correspondence with obscure European galleries, handwritten notes on the margins of art history books, and stacks of envelopes labeled by year. I found photos of him in Vienna, Prague, Buenos Aires, places he never mentioned to me. Always standing in front of a building or with a briefcase slung over his shoulder, sometimes smiling, but often with that same distant look I'd seen in real life. He wasn't a warm man. But he had been passionate. Meticulous. And, I was learning, deeply sentimental in ways that were entirely private. One envelope held a series of old drawings. I almost didn't recognize them at first. But then I looked closer. They were of me. Me at age 5, sitting on the swing in Mom's old backyard. Me holding a stuffed bear. Me, asleep in the backseat of a car. All sketched in pencil, some with light color added. I stared at them for a long time. My father had never been the affectionate type. We never really talked about feelings. But there they were, quiet evidence of his attention, of his memory. It broke something in me. I sat in the study with those sketches scattered around me and cried harder than I had at his funeral. I began cleaning the West Wing. Not just organizing, curating. It helped me cope. I hired 2 experts recommended by Halvorsen, both from the Whitney, to help appraise and properly store the pieces. They were respectful. Professional. One of them, Judith, was a quiet woman in her 60s with a deep knowledge of pre-war European art. She told me the collection was unlike anything she'd seen in private hands. This room, she said once, running her fingers along a carved frame, is a time capsule. Your father, he must have been incredibly private. He was, I said. He never talked about any of this. Judith looked around the space and nodded. Then I imagine you were the only one he trusted. That statement stayed with me for days. Outside the house, the air was changing. It was mid-autumn now. The trees around the property exploded in color, the sharp reds and ochres of a Hudson Valley fall. The long gravel driveway was covered in leaves, and every morning I'd rake a small path just to reach the gate. I barely noticed the world beyond the property. Bills were paid automatically. I let work at the library go, indefinitely. I stopped answering texts from well-meaning acquaintances. My whole existence became the house, the art, the fragments of a man I was only now beginning to piece together. But part of me was haunted. Not by my father. But by the unfinished story between us. By the knowledge that he'd spent his life building something beautiful and hiding it from the world, and from me. And by Randall's words, echoing on a loop, "You think you deserve any of this?" I didn't know. Not really. A few weeks after Randall's arrest, I got a letter from the prison. It arrived in a plain envelope, with no return address, just my name in all capital letters, the way Randall used to write holiday cards. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I left it sitting on the hallway table beneath the sconce by the front door. But I thought about it constantly. Was it an apology? A threat? A confession? I debated burning it. Then I debated framing it, unopened, as a symbol of how far I'd come. Instead, I ignored it, let it sit there while I kept moving forward. Because in the middle of everything, amid the mess and grief and dust, I had an idea. It came to me while walking through the West Wing, the morning light hitting a painting just right. A way to turn all this sorrow, all this history, into something meaningful. Not a museum. Not a vanity project. Something else. And that's where everything really started to change. The idea kept knocking at me like a loose shutter on a windy night, quiet but persistent. I started sketching it out one afternoon in the solarium, sitting at my father's old writing desk, which I had finally cleared of unopened mail and museum brochures. I wasn't going to sell the house. I knew that much. Not for any price. This place wasn't just valuable because of the art, it was the art. Every room, every artifact, every hidden drawer told a story. And the idea of boxing it all up, sending pieces to faceless buyers, or locking it away behind velvet ropes in someone else's institution felt wrong. But I also knew I couldn't keep it entirely to myself. So I started planning something small, something intimate. A private archive. A curated residency, maybe. A place where art students and historians could study the pieces, live in the space, breathe the same air as the work, but still preserve the soul of the house. A living legacy. I reached out to Judith first. She didn't even hesitate. "I think it's brilliant," she said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Your father preserved these pieces for a reason. Keeping them here, in their context, might be the most authentic way to honor that." We started working through logistics, insurance, climate control, security, visitor restrictions. It wasn't going to be open to the public like a traditional gallery. It would be strictly by appointment, academic or curatorial interest only, and everything would be documented and digitized. But as we worked through all of that, the strangest thing happened. I started dreaming again. Not metaphorically, I mean literal dreams. Ones that lingered in the morning like smoke. In them, my father would be standing at the edge of the garden, near the statue of the lion with the broken paw. He never said anything, but he always had a soft look on his face. Not sad. Not proud. Just there. Present. Watching. One night I dreamed he was sitting in the parlor, reading a book. I couldn't see which one, it was just open on his lap, but I remember walking into the room and saying, "I didn't know you liked fiction." He looked up, smiled, and said, "There's a lot you didn't know." The dreams unnerved me at first. Then they comforted me. I started keeping a journal, just like he had. I wrote everything down, what we were finding in the house, what the experts said about certain works, what I was feeling, even the weather each day. The mansion felt different now. Less like a crypt, more like a narrative unfolding. I found more notes. Tucked into books, behind mirrors, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the attic. My father had left little breadcrumbs everywhere. Some were poetic, lines from Rilke or Wilde. Others were deeply personal. One note, written on the back of an old theater program, simply said, "Sometimes I imagined you walking these halls after I was gone. You always liked the light in the south corridor." He was right. I did. I always had. Meanwhile, Randall's trial was scheduled for the following spring. He remained in custody, his bail denied after it was discovered he'd tried to bribe a night guard during his initial processing. I never visited him. I never returned his letter. But every few weeks, a call came from someone in the Darnell family, second cousins, distant nieces, old acquaintances, asking about settling things. "I just think it's such a shame," one of them told me over the phone. "Family should stick together." I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, he broke into my house and tried to steal everything my father ever loved. Instead, I said, "I'm honoring my father's wishes." They didn't call again. One afternoon, a month after Randall's arrest, I received an unexpected email from a woman named Marlena. She said she had known my father, briefly, and that she believed she had one of his lost pieces. I was skeptical, but something in the way she wrote felt genuine. So I agreed to meet. She came up from New York City, arriving in an old green Volvo with paint flaking off the sides. She was probably in her late 50s, dressed in a camel coat and black boots, with a silver locket hanging just below her collarbone. We sat in the library, surrounded by tall windows and dusty leather-bound volumes. "I met your father in 1987, she said. "He was in Berlin, for an auction. We only spent a few weeks together, but it mattered. I didn't know about the house until recently." She reached into her bag and pulled out a wrapped package. Inside was a small oil painting, familiar, unfinished. A woman at a train station, her face slightly blurred, as if caught mid-movement. I recognized the brushwork immediately. "This was me," she said, softly. "He never signed it. I thought, maybe you'd want it." I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just a painting. It was a piece of my father's life I had never known about. A window into a chapter he'd kept hidden. "Thank you," I whispered. Marlena stayed for tea. We didn't talk much more about the painting. She told me she was a teacher now, retired from a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. Before she left, she paused at the front door, hand on the frame. "He was a complicated man," she said. "But he loved you. He talked about you. Even when he didn't know how to say it directly." I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, heart pounding. That night, I finally opened Randall's letter. I won't quote all of it. Some things I'll keep for myself. But the first line read, "If you're reading this, then I suppose I've lost." The rest was strange. Not an apology, not really. He called my father a man too clever for his own good. Accused him of manipulating me, of keeping the estate out of spite. But there was also something else, something bitter, yes, but deeply revealing. He always chose silence. He'd rather write you letters you'd never read than just pick up the damn phone. He locked us all out. Maybe Randall was right about that. But the difference was, I wasn't trying to unlock my father's house just to own it. I was trying to understand it. As winter crept in, and the house began to groan with the cold, I finalized the plans for the archival residency. We named it the Darnell House Project. Judith agreed to serve as the lead curator. I'd live in the East Wing, away from the guests. The first scholars were set to arrive in early March. It was happening. And every day, I felt a little less like an outsider. A little more like a steward. There were still days I didn't know if I deserved it. Still moments I'd walk into the parlor and expect to hear my father's voice, or the scrape of his chair across the tile. But more and more, it felt like I wasn't just living in his house anymore. I was beginning to build something of my own. By February, the house was transformed, not in a flashy, HGTV kind of way, but thoughtfully, purposefully. The walls still creaked. The windows still moaned in the wind. But the energy had shifted. The West Wing had been fully restored and catalogued, with temperature-controlled glass cases installed for the most delicate pieces. Judith called in a team of interns and scholars from nearby Bard and Vassar. The old, musty dining room had been repurposed into a quiet reading space. The upstairs drawing room was now a rotating exhibit space, featuring not only my father's collection, but also student work, letters, and even the old notes and journals I kept discovering in the walls and books. We left the outside of the house untouched, no signs, no plaques, no gift shop. The only outward difference was the security gate and a simple plaque on the mailbox post that read, "Darnell House Project, by appointment only." And then, the applications began rolling in. The first group arrived in early March, 5 young curators, historians, and graduate students with wide eyes and thick notebooks. They treated the house like a living being. Every door creak became an observation. Every painting inspired paragraphs. I watched them walk the halls, pausing at the same corners I once hurried past without thinking. They were gentle with it. With me, too. One evening, over tea in the library, a student named Pilar said, "This house doesn't just have history. It has memory." It hit me harder than I expected. That's what I'd been trying to give it, what it had given me in return. Meanwhile, Randall's trial loomed. He'd been charged with multiple counts, attempted theft, fraud, trespassing, and possession of forged legal documents. His lawyer had tried to argue diminished responsibility due to mental strain following the death of his brother. It didn't work. The evidence was overwhelming: emails, security footage, forensic handwriting analysis, and most damning of all, my father's journal entries, verified and dated, which detailed the earlier thefts Randall had committed. The prosecution didn't need to dig deep. Randall's pattern of behavior had left a trail going back years. But here's the part one didn't expect: he took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 2 years in state prison with mandatory restitution. That meant he'd have to pay me, out of whatever funds he still had, for damages, including legal fees and the cost of security upgrades. He wasn't destitute. He'd squirreled away money over the years, hidden assets, sold stolen art long before this ever happened. The court ordered that his antique watch collection, his pride, his last real investment, be auctioned to begin repayment. I went to the auction. I sat in the back row, unnoticed. It wasn't about the watches. It was about something else. Reclamation. Lot after lot rolled out, vintage Rolexes, rare pocket watches, a few Art Deco pieces I recognized from his old cigar box. He didn't show, of course. He was behind bars. I won 2 items. Not because I wanted them, but because I knew it would sting. I sent one to the local museum, anonymously donated under my father's name. The other, a delicate platinum piece with a cracked face, I placed in the center of the West Wing gallery. Beneath it, a small card, from the hands of time once stolen. Returned, not for vengeance, but for truth. I didn't need Randall to suffer. I just needed the legacy he tried to steal to become something bigger than either of us. That spring, the Darnell House project was featured in Art Forum. Then the New Yorker. Then, shockingly, on a quiet segment of CBS Sunday Morning. It never became famous, not in a touristy way. But among artists, scholars, collectors, it became a quiet legend. I started giving tours myself, once a week, by candlelight, small groups only. I'd walk them through the gallery, tell them stories from my father's notes, and show them the hidden compartments he used to tuck away sketches and secrets. And then, at the end, I'd walk them past the old door to the attic, still locked, still dusty, and tell them, he never finished his story. So I'm writing the rest. And Randall? He was released early on good behavior, about 1.5 years later. He didn't contact me. Didn't show his face in Rhinebeck. His name faded from polite conversation, whispered only occasionally in legal circles or family gossip. But I heard through someone that he'd moved down south, Florida, maybe. Working under a different name. No more antiques, no more collectors' clubs. Just obscurity. And that was the most satisfying ending of all. Not his pain. His irrelevance. He didn't take the house. He didn't take the art. He didn't even get remembered. I did. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I chose legacy over resentment. Now, when I walk the halls of this house, I don't feel like a visitor anymore. I feel like the keeper of a flame. My father's legacy isn't just protected, it's alive. And I'm not nothing,